You're not family anymore, Madison. Don't even think about showing up." Those words echoed in my mind as I stood on the deck of my Malibu beach house, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold. My mother's voice, cold and final, delivered through a crackling phone connection 3 weeks ago. 10 years of complete silence. Not a single birthday call. Not one holiday greeting. And now they were officially excluding me from the family reunion. But there was something Mom didn't know. The location for this year's reunion? The exclusive beach house my sister Stephanie had booked through a luxury rental company? It was mine. I'd bought it 6 months ago for $2.8 million cash. The irony was almost too perfect. I never planned for it to happen this way. When Stephanie called the rental agency looking for the most prestigious oceanfront property in Malibu, my property manager simply matched her request to my house. Standard business. I could have intervened, could have revealed myself then. But something held me back. Maybe I needed to see just how far they'd go to erase me from the family narrative. Growing up in the Rivers household in Connecticut, everything revolved around one principle: success equals financial achievement. My father, Michael Rivers, built his reputation as a top financial advisor by turning modest investments into substantial portfolios. My mother, Patricia, dominated the local real estate market, moving million-dollar properties like chess pieces. Together, they created an empire of respectability and wealth. They also created a hierarchy among their children that would define our relationships forever. Brandon, my older brother, was the golden child from the moment he could recite stock prices at age 12. 3 years older than me, he possessed that natural business instinct that made our parents beam with pride. Every dinner conversation centered on his latest achievement: honor roll, debate team captain, early admission to Harvard Business School. When he graduated with his MBA from Wharton, Dad didn't just attend the ceremony. He threw a party that became legendary in our social circle. Stephanie, 2 years my senior, claimed her place as the second golden child through sheer determination. If Brandon was the natural, Stephanie was the perfectionist. Law school at Yale, internship at a prestigious firm, partnership track before 30. Mom would introduce her at parties as my daughter, the future Supreme Court Justice, only half joking. Then there was me. At 17, while my siblings discussed market trends and legal precedents, I wrote stories. I filled notebooks with characters who felt real, worlds that made sense, emotions that mattered. When other kids were calculating GPAs and SAT scores, I was calculating whether my protagonist would choose love or duty in Chapter 12. My parents viewed this as a character flaw to be corrected. "Writing is a hobby, Madison, not a career," Mom would say, sliding another business school brochure across the breakfast table. "You need to think about your future realistically." The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to USC with a full scholarship for creative writing, a program that only accepted 20 students nationwide. When I burst through the front door with the acceptance letter, practically vibrating with excitement, I found my parents in the living room reviewing Brandon's latest business plan. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe—" "Not now, Madison," Dad interrupted without looking up. "Brandon's proposing a revolutionary investment strategy for his senior thesis." I waited. 15 minutes. 20. Finally, Mom glanced up with that patient expression she reserved for my phases. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I got the scholarship, full ride to USC. Creative writing program." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Brandon looked up from his papers, eyebrows raised. Dad set down his pen with deliberate precision. "Madison," Mom said slowly, "we've talked about this. That's not a real degree. It's USC. It's one of the best programs in the country." "For what?" Dad leaned back in his chair. "So you can graduate and wait tables while you write the great American novel? We didn't raise you to be unrealistic." Brandon, ever the diplomat, tried to help. Maybe she could double major, business and writing. "The scholarship is specifically for the creative writing program," I said, my voice getting smaller. Dad shook his head. "We're not signing off on this, Madison. You can reapply to real schools for business or pre-law. Take a gap year, get some perspective." "But it's a full scholarship for a worthless degree." Mom's voice carried that final note that meant the discussion was over. You'll thank us when you're not drowning in student debt for a piece of paper that qualifies you for nothing. That night, I called the USC admissions office and declined the scholarship. I told them my parents wouldn't sign the financial aid forms. The admissions counselor was sympathetic but helpless. No signature, no enrollment. I spent the next year watching my classmates head off to college while I took community college courses and worked at a local bookstore. My parents seemed pleased with this practical choice. They talked about transferring to state school for business, about getting my head out of the clouds. But something had broken in me during that phone call to USC. It wasn't just the lost opportunity. It was the realization that my dreams didn't matter to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The pattern only intensified as Brandon and Stephanie flourished. Christmas mornings became showcases of favoritism so obvious it was almost satirical. Brandon would unwrap a Rolex, Stephanie would receive diamond earrings, and I would get practical gifts. A day planner, professional interview clothes, books about realistic career planning. Family photos told the same story. Our mantelpiece displayed a progression of images. Early photos featured all 3 children prominently, but by my college years, I'd somehow migrated to the edges, then disappeared entirely. The center of every frame belonged to Brandon in his business suits and Stephanie in her lawyer attire. Dinner conversations followed the same script. Dad would ask Brandon about his latest client acquisition. Mom would inquire about Stephanie's cases. When the spotlight occasionally swung to me, it carried an undertone of disappointment. "Any word on those job interviews?" Mom would ask, the emphasis on job making it clear that my freelance writing didn't qualify as real work. The final attempt came when I was 22. I'd won a national writing contest, a story about family dynamics that earned me $50,000 and publication in a prestigious literary magazine. It was the kind of recognition that opened doors, the kind of achievement that proved creative writing could be financially viable. I called home, breathless with excitement. "Mom, I won! The Hemingway Foundation contest. $50,000 and they want to discuss a book deal." "That's nice, dear." Her voice carried that distracted tone she used when she was multitasking. "Did you hear Brandon got promoted to senior associate?" The phone went quiet. I could hear her typing in the background. "Mom, did you hear what I said? $50,000 for my writing." "Mm-hmm. Listen, honey, I'm in the middle of a contract negotiation. Can we talk later?" We never did talk later. Brandon's promotion dominated family conversations for weeks. My award was never mentioned again. That's when the self-doubt really took hold. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a dreamer refusing to face reality. Maybe success meant corner offices and courtrooms, not notebooks and characters that lived only in my imagination. By my 23rd birthday, the weight of their disappointment had become unbearable. Every family gathering was an exercise in feeling invisible. Every phone call carried the subtext that I was the family failure. When I tried to share small victories, a published short story, a freelance assignment, the response was always the same: polite interest followed by immediate subject change to my siblings' real accomplishments. The breaking point came during Brandon's engagement party. I'd driven up from Los Angeles, where I was struggling to make rent on a studio apartment through freelance writing and barista shifts. The party was everything I'd expected: elegant, expensive, filled with the kind of successful people my parents collected like trophies. I spent most of the evening standing near the catering table, watching my family work the room. Mom introduced Brandon and his fiancée to everyone as my son, the investment genius, and his brilliant lawyer bride-to-be. Stephanie held court near the bar, discussing her latest courtroom victory with a circle of admirers. Nobody introduced me as anything. Around 10 o'clock, I approached Mom to say goodbye. She was deep in conversation with Mrs. Chen, our neighbor who'd always been kind to me. "Madison," Mrs. Chen exclaimed when she saw me. "How wonderful to see you. I read that story you published in Harper's. Absolutely beautiful work." I felt a flush of pride. Someone had noticed. Someone cared. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Madison's still exploring her creative side. We keep hoping she'll settle into something more stable." The dismissal was elegant and devastating. Mrs. Chen's enthusiasm dimmed as she caught the subtext. I mumbled something about early morning plans and headed for the door. Dad caught up with me in the driveway. "Madison, wait." I turned, hoping for something. Acknowledgement, pride, even basic parental concern. "Your mother and I have been talking. We think it's time you considered graduate school, MBA, law school, something that leads to a real career." He handed me a business card. "This is a friend of mine in admissions at Northwestern. He owes me a favor." I stared at the card. 2 years of business school. 2 years of learning to think like Brandon, to value profit over passion, to measure success by the size of my office rather than the power of my words. What if I don't want that? Dad's expression hardened. What you want and what you need are different things. You're 25, Madison. When are you going to grow up? That night, driving back to LA on the empty freeway, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was done trying to earn their approval. I was done shrinking myself to fit their definition of success. I was done being the family disappointment. I decided to disappear from their lives entirely. The next morning, I changed my phone number. I deactivated my social media accounts. I stopped attending family gatherings, stopped calling on holidays, stopped trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as fundamentally flawed. The first 6 months were brutal, not because I missed the criticism or the constant sense of inadequacy, but because cutting ties with family is like amputating part of yourself. Even toxic relationships leave phantom limbs, moments when you reach for connection that's no longer there. But something else happened during those months of silence. Without the constant chorus of disapproval, I began to hear my own voice more clearly. My writing grew stronger, more confident. I stopped second-guessing every creative choice, stopped filtering my ideas through the lens of my parents' practicality. I also stopped checking my bank account with anxiety every morning. The breakthrough came through Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, who'd moved to LA to work as a senior editor at a literary magazine. We'd met at a coffee shop in West Hollywood, bonding over shared memories of Connecticut and the strange experience of disappointing successful parents. Sarah was the first person in years who talked about writing as a legitimate career, rather than an expensive hobby. She read my work with the kind of attention I'd forgotten was possible, not scanning for marketability or practical applications, but engaging with the stories themselves. "You write trauma really well," she said over coffee one Tuesday morning, my latest short story spread across the table between us. Not in an exploitative way, but with this incredible empathy. "Have you considered memoir work, ghostwriting?" I hadn't. Fiction had always been my focus, creating imaginary people to work through real emotions. But Sarah's suggestion opened a door I hadn't known existed. "There's a whole market for memoir ghostwriting," she continued. "High-profile people who have stories to tell but lack the skills to tell them well. The pay is excellent, and the work is meaningful." She introduced me to David Martinez, who ran a boutique publishing consultancy specializing in executive memoirs. David was looking for a writer who could handle sensitive material with discretion and craft compelling narratives from raw life experiences. My first assignment was ghostwriting the memoir of a tech CEO who'd built $1 billion company after growing up in foster care. The story resonated with something deep in my own experience, the journey from being undervalued to creating undeniable worth. I threw myself into the project with intensity that surprised even me. For 3 months, I interviewed the CEO, researched his industry, and crafted his story with the kind of attention to detail my parents had always claimed I lacked. When the manuscript was complete, David called it exactly what we were looking for: professional, compelling, and deeply human. The CEO loved it. More importantly, he paid me $15,000 for 3 months of work, more than I'd ever earned from my fiction writing. Word spread quickly in the tight circle of high-net-worth individuals who needed their stories told. By my second year of ghostwriting, I was earning 6 figures annually. By the 3rd year, I'd expanded into a full literary services company, helping executives, entrepreneurs, and celebrities craft memoirs, speeches, and thought leadership content. The transformation was remarkable. I went from struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment to living in a spacious loft in Santa Monica. I traded anxiety about grocery money for decisions about investment portfolios. Most importantly, I traded the constant questioning of my worth for confidence in my abilities. But I told none of this to my family. The silence I'd imposed remained absolute. In 2019, everything changed. I was hired to ghostwrite the memoir of Marcus Webb, a tech billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud computing. His story was incredibly complex, a brilliant mind navigating industry politics, personal relationships, and the responsibility of enormous wealth. The project took 8 months and paid me $250,000. With that single paycheck, I crossed into a different financial stratosphere. I invested wisely, diversifying into real estate, stocks, and emerging markets. I hired Emma Thompson, a celebrity literary consultant, to help position my own writing for publication. I brought on Robert Kim, an entertainment lawyer, to handle increasingly complex contract negotiations. By 2020, Madison Rivers Literary Services was generating over $500,000 annually. My client list read like a Fortune 500 directory. 3 CEOs, 2 politicians, and an Academy Award-winning actor who trusted me with stories they'd never told publicly. I also published my first book under my own name, a novel about family trauma and healing that drew heavily on my own experiences. It hit the New York Times bestseller list in its 8th week and stayed there for 6 months. The financial success was gratifying, but the creative recognition was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. In 2021, my company revenue reached $1.2 million. In 2022, it hit $2.1 million. I was no longer just financially stable. I was wealthy by any reasonable standard. That's when I bought the beach house. I've been looking at real estate investments for months when the Malibu property came on the market. 2,800 square feet of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, with a private beach access and infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean horizon. The asking price was $2.8 million. I made an all-cash offer that was accepted within 24 hours. Standing in my new living room that first day, watching dolphins play in the surf beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, I thought about that 17-year-old girl who'd declined a full scholarship because her parents wouldn't sign the forms. I thought about all the years of believing I was impractical, unrealistic, fundamentally flawed. I thought about how wrong they'd been about everything. But even as my professional life flourished beyond my wildest dreams, the silence from Connecticut remained absolute. No congratulations on the bestseller, no acknowledgement of my success, no curiosity about the life I'd built. It was as if I'd never existed at all. That changed in March 2023, when my grandmother Rose passed away at 92. Rose had been different from my parents, a retired English teacher who'd always encouraged my writing, who'd slipped me books by authors my parents considered impractical. She was the only family member who'd ever made me feel like my dreams had value. The funeral was my first time back in Connecticut in 7 years. I flew in quietly, stayed at a hotel, and sat in the back row of the church during the service. My family didn't even notice me until the will reading at the lawyer's office afterward. When I walked into that familiar conference room, the shock on their faces was almost comical. Brandon actually did a double take. Stephanie's mouth fell slightly open. My parents looked like they'd seen a ghost, which in a way they had. "Madison," Mom said faintly, "we didn't know you were... We weren't sure if you'd heard about Grandma Rose." Of course I heard. I loved her. The lawyer, uncomfortable with the family dynamics playing out in his office, cleared his throat and began reading. Most of Rose's modest estate went to my parents, with smaller amounts to Brandon and Stephanie. Then came the surprise. To my granddaughter, Madison Rivers, who had the courage to choose love over money, I leave $50,000 and my collection of first edition novels, with the hope that she continues to find magic in stories. The silence in that room was deafening. $50,000 represented the largest individual bequest aside from what my parents inherited. More significantly, Rose's note made it clear she'd been following my career, proud of my choices even when no one else was. My mother's face cycled through emotions: surprise, calculation, and something that looked almost like resentment. "How did she even know where to find you?" Stephanie asked. "You disappeared completely." "I sent her letters," I said simply, "and copies of everything I published." The revelation that Rose had been secretly proud of me, that she'd stayed connected despite my parents' narrative of disappointment, shifted something fundamental in the room's dynamic. After the lawyer's office, we stood awkwardly in the parking lot. 7 years of silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Maybe," Mom said carefully, "we could have dinner, catch up." I looked at these people who'd shaped my childhood, who'd convinced me I was fundamentally flawed, who'd cut me out of their lives so completely they hadn't even tried to find me for Rose's funeral. "I don't think so," I said, "but thank you for the offer." I drove back to my hotel alone, leaving them standing in the parking lot looking bewildered. 2 weeks later, Stephanie called the hotel where I'd stayed, somehow tracking down my information. She left a message about planning a family reunion to heal after grandmother's death, a weekend getaway to reconnect as a family. She'd found an exclusive beach house in Malibu through a luxury rental company, $8,000 for the weekend, but worth it for such a special property. She hoped I'd consider attending. I listened to the voicemail twice, then called my property management company to confirm what I already suspected. Yes, they'd received a booking for the Rivers family reunion. Yes, it was for my house. The irony was so perfect, it felt like the universe orchestrating a cosmic joke. I had 2 choices: reveal the truth immediately and watch them scramble to cancel, or let events unfold naturally and see just how far they'd go to exclude me from family reconciliation. I chose to wait. 3 weeks later, Mom made the call that brought everything full circle. "Madison, we've been planning this reunion and..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We decided this should be immediate family only. You've been so distant and this house is extremely expensive. We can't afford an extra person." "I understand," I said calmly. "Enjoy your time together." "You're not upset?" I almost laughed. After 10 years of building an empire they knew nothing about, after buying the very house they were renting to exclude me from, upset seemed like an inadequate word. "No, Mom, I'm not upset. I hope you have a wonderful weekend." I hung up and walked onto my deck, looking out at the Pacific. In 48 hours, my family would arrive at my house, believing they'd successfully erased me from their reunion. They'd walk through rooms I'd furnished, admire views I owned, sleep in beds I'd bought. And they'd have no idea that the daughter they'd dismissed as impractical had been successful enough to buy their weekend paradise with cash. The girl who'd once been denied a college scholarship for being unrealistic now owned a $2.8 million piece of Malibu real estate. The family failure had become the family success story they'd never see coming. Tomorrow, they discovered just how wrong they'd been about everything. The morning of the reunion, I positioned myself in the master bedroom of my beach house, coffee in hand, watching the circular driveway through the panoramic windows. At exactly 11 a.m., 2 rental cars pulled through the gates, a black Escalade and a silver Mercedes. Through the tinted glass, I could see the unmistakable silhouettes of my family. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. 10 years of building walls had taught me how to control my reactions, how to present calm when everything inside was churning. I heard voices in the entryway below, Mom's authoritative tone directing luggage placement, Dad's gruff commands about parking, the excited chatter of extended family I hadn't seen in a decade. My aunts and uncles had made the trip, along with several cousins. The reunion was larger than I'd expected. From my vantage point, I watched them explore the main level. Through the open bedroom door, I could hear fragments of conversation drifting up the stairs. "Patricia, this place is incredible." Aunt Lisa's voice carried clearly. "How did you find it?" "Stephanie handled all the arrangements," Mom replied with that proud tone she reserved for her successful children. "She has connections in the luxury rental market." $8,000 for the weekend," I heard Uncle Tom whistle appreciatively. "Worth every penny for a property like this." Cousin Jennifer's voice joined the chorus. "The architecture is stunning. This has to be worth millions. 2.8, actually, Stephanie said with authority. I researched the property value. The owner bought it cash last year. Must be nice to have that kind of money. I sipped my coffee, allowing myself a small smile. If only they knew. The morning progressed with the typical family reunion rhythm. Unpacking, claiming bedrooms, planning activities. I remained upstairs, listening to the familiar voices that had once been my entire world. It was surreal, hearing my family in my house while they believed I was hundreds of miles away, excluded from their reconciliation. Around noon, the conversation took a predictable turn. It's too bad Madison couldn't make it, Aunt Lisa said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality people use when discussing family black sheep. The silence that followed was telling. Well, Mom's voice was measured, diplomatic. Madison has been distant for quite some time. We felt this should be immediate family, people who've maintained connections. I haven't seen her in years, Cousin Mark added. What's she doing these days? Another pause. I could practically hear Mom choosing her words. She's still in California, still trying to make it as a writer, last we heard. You know how unstable that lifestyle can be. We keep hoping she'll settle into something more practical. Uncle Tom, ever the real estate developer, chimed in. Shame she's missing this. Location like this might inspire her creativity. Madison's always been a dreamer. Dad's voice carried that familiar note of disappointment. Some people never learn to face reality. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. 10 years of silence, and their narrative remained unchanged. I was still the impractical dreamer, still the family failure, still the cautionary tale they told at gatherings. It was time to change that narrative. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it fully. The sound of my footsteps on the hardwood stairs caused the conversation below to pause mid-sentence. I descended slowly, casually, as if I'd simply been upstairs reading. Morning, everyone, I said, appearing in the living room doorway with my coffee mug. I hope you all slept well. The silence was absolute. Mom's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, recognition, shock, then something approaching panic. Dad's mouth actually fell open. Stephanie, perched on the leather sectional I'd spent weeks selecting, looked like she'd seen a ghost. But it was the extended family's reaction that interested me most. Aunt Lisa's eyes widened with delight. Uncle Tom broke into a grin. My cousins started talking at once. Madison! Oh my God! We thought you weren't coming. How did you get in here? When did you arrive? I remained calm, taking another sip of coffee. I've been here all morning. Beautiful sunrise from the deck. You should check it out. Mom found her voice first, though it came out strained. Madison, what? How? There must be some mistake. The rental company said... Before she could finish, the sound of the front door opening interrupted her. James Morrison, my property manager, appeared in the entryway carrying a clipboard and wearing his usual professional smile. Ms. Rivers, he said, approaching me directly, I wanted to confirm that everything is set for your family's stay. The housekeeping service stocked the kitchen as requested, and the concierge service is on standby if you need anything else. The silence that followed could have been measured in geological time. Uncle Tom, the real estate developer, was the first to process what he'd heard. His eyes moved from James to me, then to the obvious deference in the property manager's demeanor. Wait, he said slowly. Ms. Rivers? Madison? This is your house? I nodded simply. I bought it last year. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and overlapping. Your house? You own this place? But how? When did? Cousin Jennifer, who worked in marketing for a publishing house in New York, suddenly went very still. I watched recognition dawn across her face. Oh my God, she said quietly, then louder. Oh my God, M.R. Rivers. You're M.R. Rivers. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, quickly navigating to what I recognized as the New York Times bestseller list. Look! She thrust the phone toward the room. Madison Rivers, number 4 on the fiction list. Breaking Patterns, a novel. I have this book. I read this book. Aunt Lisa gasped. You're a published author? A best-selling author? The questions came faster now, the family dynamics shifting in real time as information cascaded through the room. Uncle Tom was Googling my name on his phone. Cousin Mark was staring at me like I'd transformed before his eyes. But it was my parents and siblings who remained frozen, their faces cycling through disbelief, verification, and stunned comprehension. "Show them the office," James suggested helpfully, clearly enjoying the moment. "I think they'd appreciate seeing Ms. Rivers' workspace." I led the group down the hallway to my home office, a space I'd designed for both productivity and inspiration. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the ocean. Built-in shelves held my published works alongside client projects, and the walls displayed framed awards and letters from satisfied clients. The room told the story of my success more clearly than any explanation could. Uncle Tom examined the property deed hanging in a place of honor, my name clearly visible as the sole owner. Aunt Lisa was reading testimonial letters from Fortune 500 CEOs praising my ghostwriting work. Cousin Jennifer had found my literary awards, including the Hemingway Foundation Prize I'd won at 22. $2.8 million, Uncle Tom murmured, reviewing the purchase documents. "Cash purchase, no mortgage." "Madison," Aunt Lisa said, her voice filled with wonder, "these client testimonials. You've worked with some of the most powerful people in America." "Ghostwriting pays well," I said simply, "especially when you're good at it." Stephanie finally found her voice. But when? How long have you been doing this?" "I started about 8 years ago," I replied. "Built the business gradually. The house was a reward to myself when my company hit $2 million in annual revenue." Dad's face had gone pale. I could practically see him calculating the numbers, understanding for perhaps the first time the magnitude of what I'd achieved, while they believed I was struggling in some cramped apartment. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like smoke. Around us, extended family members were sharing my success on social media, texting friends about discovering their famous author cousin, treating me like a celebrity they'd just met. But at the center of the celebration, a smaller, more complex drama was playing out. "Tell you?" I repeated, setting down my coffee mug on the desk where contracts worth millions had been signed. "When would I have told you? During the 10 years of complete silence? During the calls that never came? At the funeral where you seemed surprised I existed?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Madison, we never meant—" "You excluded me from this reunion 3 weeks ago," I continued, my voice calm but clear. "You told me you couldn't afford an extra person at a house that costs $8,000 for the weekend, a house that I own. A house where I've been successful enough to buy with cash while you still thought I was a struggling dreamer." The extended family was listening now, the social media posting forgotten as they witnessed this decade-long family rift finally coming into the light. "We made mistakes," Dad said, his voice rough. "We were trying to protect you from disappointment." "Protect me?" I almost laughed. "You denied me a full scholarship to USC because you thought writing was worthless. You dismissed a $50,000 literary prize as unimportant. You erased me from family photos and conversations. How exactly was that protection?" Stephanie, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, spoke up. "We didn't know. If we'd known you were successful—" "Would that have made a difference?" I asked. "Would you have loved me if I'd been a struggling artist who brought joy to people's lives but never made money? Would my worth as your daughter have depended on my bank account?" The question silenced them because we all knew the answer. Uncle Tom, bless him, tried to lighten the mood. "Well, this calls for a celebration. Our Madison is a best-selling author and businesswoman." The extended family rallied around his enthusiasm, but the damage was already visible in my parents' faces. They'd been confronted with undeniable evidence of their own short-sightedness, and it was devastating. Over the next 24 hours, I watched my family reckon with a reality that challenged everything they'd believed about success, family, and love. Saturday evening, as the extended family enjoyed dinner on the deck, catered by a restaurant I'd arranged through my concierge service, Mom approached me in the kitchen. "Madison," she said, her voice raw, "can we talk?" We stepped onto the side terrace away from the others. The sunset was painting the Pacific in brilliant oranges and purples, the same view that had sold me on the house. "I owe you an apology," she began. "We owe you an apology. What we did, how we treated your dreams, it was wrong." I waited. 10 years had taught me the value of silence. We were so focused on what we thought success looked like that we couldn't see. We couldn't see that you were building something extraordinary. Tears streamed down her face. "You were right, and we were wrong, and now I don't know how to fix it." "Mom," I said gently, "this isn't about being right or wrong. It's about understanding that love shouldn't be conditional on someone meeting your expectations." "We always loved you." "You loved the version of me you wanted me to become," I corrected. "You never loved the person I actually was." She sobbed then, the kind of deep, body-shaking grief that comes from recognizing irreversible loss. Dad appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "Madison, your mother and I, we want to make this right. We'll invest in your business, help you expand." "No." My voice was firm but not unkind. "I don't need your money, Dad. I never did." "Then what do you need?" Mom asked through her tears. I looked out at the ocean, then back at these people who'd shaped my childhood in ways both beautiful and damaging. "I need you to understand that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the prestige of your job title. I need you to acknowledge that you caused real harm when you dismissed my dreams as worthless, and I need you to accept that some damage can't be fixed with apologies or money." "So you'll never forgive us?" Dad's voice was hollow. "Forgiveness isn't the issue," I said. "The issue is whether we can build a relationship based on who we actually are, rather than who we wish each other were." Sunday morning brought the inevitable departure. Extended family members hugged me goodbye with genuine warmth, promising to stay in touch, expressing pride in my success. Several had already ordered copies of my book online. My parents and siblings packed with awkward efficiency, the weekend having shattered their understanding of our family dynamic. As they loaded their cars, Mom made one final attempt. "Madison, please, let us be part of your life. We can change." I stood on my front steps looking at these people who'd once been my entire world. "Maybe," I said, "but change has to come from understanding, not from guilt. You need to figure out why you valued money over your daughter's happiness. You need to understand why you were willing to cut me out of family healing while benefiting from my success. And you need to do that work whether or not it leads to reconciliation with me." Brandon, who'd been largely silent all weekend, stepped forward. "What if we went to therapy? Family counseling?" "That's a start," I acknowledged, "but understand that I'm not doing it to rebuild what we had. I'm only willing to explore what we might become." They drove away that afternoon, leaving me alone in my house with the sound of waves and the weight of a decade finally acknowledged. That evening, I stood on my deck watching the sunset, thinking about the 17-year-old girl who'd believed her parents when they said her dreams were worthless. I thought about the years of self-doubt, the struggle to believe in myself without external validation, the lonely journey of building success while grieving the family I'd lost. But mostly, I thought about freedom. I'd spent so many years trying to earn their approval that I'd forgotten how peaceful life could be without constantly measuring myself against impossible standards. I'd built something beautiful, not just the business or the house, but a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else's recognition. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, my editor friend who'd first suggested ghostwriting. "Heard through the grapevine that you had quite the family weekend. You okay?" I smiled, typing back, "More than okay. I think I'm finally free." The truth was, I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I'd spent a decade proving I could succeed without it. What I'd learned this weekend wasn't just that they'd been wrong about me. It was that their opinion of me had stopped mattering years ago. Success, I realized, wasn't just about building wealth or achieving recognition. It was about becoming so secure in your own worth that other people's judgments couldn't shake your foundation. Standing on my deck, watching dolphins play in the surf beyond my infinity pool, I felt something I'd been searching for since childhood, complete peace with who I was and what I'd built. The family who'd once dismissed me as an impractical dreamer had spent the weekend in the home my dreams had purchased. They'd slept in beds bought with money I'd earned through the career they'd called worthless. They'd admired views I owned, eaten food I'd provided, and finally understood that the daughter they'd tried to change had been perfect exactly as she was. I didn't need their apologies or their promises to change. I didn't need them to understand my success or validate my choices. I just needed them to know that the girl they'd underestimated had grown into a woman who no longer needed their approval to shine. The sunset faded into stars, and I remained on my deck, finally, completely, beautifully free.